Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says maximum governor. We have the Kerala government which wanted to hold a special session. What was the special session all about? They wanted to discuss about the farm laws and pass a resolution against the farm laws introduced by the central government. Therefore, the government forwarded the decision of the state cabinet to the governor to convene the session so that they can discuss all the issues about the farm laws. This is when they approached the governor of Kerala. But the Kerala governor did not accept the recommendation of the cabinet. Instead, asked the cabinet headed by the chief minister what was the urgency for the discussion and convening of this session. The governor rejected the state cabinet's decision to convene a special session of the assembly to pass a resolution against all these farm laws passed by the central government. In this particular backdrop, we have to understand whether the discretionary power of the governor is present when it comes to convening of the session when it comes to the state assemblies. What does the constitution speak about it? We have one of the important articles of the constitution. We have article 174 of the constitution of India, which says the governor shall from time to time summon the house or each house of the legislature of the state to meet at such time and place as he thinks fit. This means that when you look at it at a bare level, it looks like the governor has the power to convene the session and he has the prerogative and the discretionary power. Fair enough. But the literal meaning and what is present in the constitution is totally different. Why? Because we have to refer another important article, and that is article 163 of the Indian constitution. What does article 163 speak about? It says that the governor has to listen to the cabinet. The aid and advice of the cabinet is what has to be taken prerogative under article 163 of the Indian constitution. Does it mean that now under article 174 it is the individual prerogative of the governor? No. When you make a reading of article 174 along with article 163 of the Indian constitution, it is not the discretionary power that is given to the governor, but there is a provision where he has to listen to the cabinet, summon the house, and they can also consider the proceedings with respect to the house. So in the present scenario, when the special session was requested by the Kerala government, the Kerala cabinet, ideally the governor should have listened to it, convened the house, and the proceedings should have been initiated. But according to the constitution and laws, the governor did not listen to it. So that is why the article says that this is the maximum power where this has been misused, misutilized, abused by the governor who holds a constitutional position when it comes to the state of Kerala. Now, does it mean that the governor will always have to listen to the chief minister and the cabinet? No. Let's say, for example, whenever the chief minister has lost the majority in such a situation, the governor need not have to listen to the chief minister. There are also scenarios where a no confidence motion is proposed against the chief minister. Then again, the governor can decide on his own or on her own for summoning the house as well. But the actions of the governor when such a prerogative is taken can also be discussed in the court of law as well. So such an issue will also come under the judicial review of the High Court or the Supreme Court of India. Now what we have to look at is about the previous precedents that which has been established by the Supreme Court of India. This is what the constitution speaks about. Now let's look at what the Supreme Court has discussed when it comes to a similar precedent of the governor's discretionary power. The Supreme Court has clearly gone on to say that the governor cannot refuse the request of a cabinet that enjoys the majority in the house. What has the Supreme Court said? In case there is a chief minister, he is backed by the cabinet, they have the numbers, it's not a hung assembly, and they have all the numbers to run the government. If they are in majority in such a scenario, the governor will have to comply by the rules of the chief minister and the cabinet. In case he does not so, it means there is an unconstitutional precedent set by the governor, says the Supreme Court of India. The Supreme Court has further reiterated the same when it came to the 2016 constitutional crisis in the Arunachal Pradesh. What did the Supreme Court say? That the Supreme Court went on to say that this is a function of the governor and not the power that which is accommodated to the governor. Usually, a reading of 174 says that it is the power of the governor to summon or prorogue the house, but this power is not directly given to the governor, but instead it has to be in resonance with the powers of the chief minister as well as the cabinet. So under Article 174 of the Indian Constitution, the power to summon, prorogue and dissolve the house must be exercised in consonance with the aid and advice of the chief minister and his council of ministers, says the Supreme Court of India. This is what the Supreme Court of India has laid in the year 2016 with respect to the constitutional crisis that which happened in Arunachal Pradesh. What has the Sarkaria Commission spoken about it? The Sarkaria Commission also holds a similar view as that of the Supreme Court of India. When it comes to the Sarkaria Commission, it has clearly gone on to say that whenever there is the assembly which enjoys the confidence, the chief minister has the numbers. He is backed by the council of ministers as well. In such matters, when the advice of the council of ministers and the chief minister is not taken into picture by the governor, it becomes unconstitutional, says the Sarkaria Commission. Only when the council of ministers does not have the numbers, the chief minister does not enjoy the majority, that is when the governor has the discretion, says the Sarkaria Commission. So the question arises whether that particular governor can act in discretion or not, only when the chief minister does not have the numbers in the assembly. This raises couple of issues in the present scenario with respect to the state of Kerala. What are the issues that we have to look at? The misuse of this particular power by the Kerala governor means that this is a disruption of the federalism. Federalism is part of the basic structure doctrine. If the governor, who has to act as a bridge between the central government and the state government, is acting as a stooge of the central government, it means that he is violating the very principles of the federalism. If that principle is violated, it also means that the will of the people is also violated. When the will of the people is violated, it means that the governor is acting as a monarchy and not as a republic government, is what we have to understand. So encroaching upon the powers of the legislature also means that the will of the people is getting violated, says the article. So going forward, the governor should act as a constitutional office. He should be an arbitrator between the central government and the state government, and only when the state government is violating the norms of the constitution, that is when the governor has to uphold it rather than interfering with the affairs of the state government. So in the present scenario, it was the right call of the Kerala government. So this particular request had to have been accepted, and he should not act as a political party person. He should be non-partisan, he should be impartial and work as per the mandate given by the Constitution of India, says this article. This is where we have Mohandas Karamchand Gandhiji, who went on to say that the office of the governor should be an arbitrator, where he has to end the deadlock between the state government and the central government and should act as an impartial role. According to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, sir, he goes on to say that the governor is the representative not of a political party, he is the representative of the people of the state that he represents. It is in the name of the people that he carries on the administration, says Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, sir, in this particular scenario. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says, or not to recognizing the value of housework. We have the upcoming elections in the state of Tamil Nadu. Many political parties are wanting to attract their voters, and one such proposal is also made by one of the political party headed by veteran actor Kamal Hassan, which goes on to promise that in case they do come into power, all the full-time housewives, house workers would be provided a monetary compensation, which should be a monthly amount given to all the women who are acting as the house workers. In this particular backdrop, we have to understand whether the state, that is the government, will have to provide such an amount to the housewives, the house workers, and we have to understand Why is that such a scenario of house workers not recognized as labor? First important question is we have to understand relevant statistics. When you look at the report published by the International Labour Organization in 2018, it goes on to show that globally women perform 76.2% of the total hours of unpaid care work, more than 3 times as much as men. When you look into the Asia Pacific region, this figure rises to about 80%. So what are these figures all about? That there are women who are working at house, they toil day in and day out, they have no holidays, we all have Saturdays and Sundays, we have weekends as well, but women do not have these week offs and they are unpaid workers working for the family. Sometimes this is also called as labor of love. What is this labor of love? That they are doing it out of love. They do not want any money. They are the caretakers of the family. They take care of the parents, husband, children, so on and so forth, and they do not expect any money or paid work, is what is the meaning of the labor of love. In this particular backdrop, we have to understand what is the movement of wages for housework, where did it originate, and what is the impact that it will have with respect to the women. Back in the 1972, we have Selma James, who happened to be one of the main campaigners for this particular movement. What was this campaign or the movement all about? Basically, women are treated not in parity with the men. Alongside the social and political equality, where they were seeking social equality, that they were being treated not equally to men. So what they wanted was social justice, where there was no parity, there was no equality. So they were requesting for social equality when it comes to the society, and they were also seeking for the political equality as well. What is this political equality? That women would be able to contest the elections, that women have the right to vote as well. Yes, India was a country which provided immediately the right to vote and contest the elections as well, but majority of the Western countries did not have this very provision of political equality. It was dominated by men. It was also dominated by patriarchal society. So this particular movement was fighting, one for the social equality, the other for the political equality. We also have to understand for the fact that this particular idea that women are supposed to be restricted to their households, they have to take care of the family, they have to take care of the children, is assumed to be a biological process where it is just pushed or enforced on them. And in a paradoxical manner, it is also being said that women are the home ministers of the house, but husbands are the financial ministers. To overcome this particular issue, they came up with a movement called as the wages for the housework. So what is this wages for the housework? Basically, for all the work that women perform at the houses, whether it is sweeping, whether it is cooking, whether it is mopping or any other work, in most of the cases it is unpaid work. In order to make sure that they are provided some amount, what we have is a movement called as the wages for housework, where this particular campaign and the movement requested the government and the state to provide women certain money so that they can stay independent of the men. So this particular movement was a revolt against the established standards prevalent in the society, and this was not only about wages but about equality and parity with men as well. So it allowed the women to see potential collective power where all women came together and they were seeking for the parity in the society. Therefore, if this particular proposal is accepted by the government, that is by the state, in the near future, they would be completely independent. They don't have to depend on their husbands and they would be able to make individual decision making when it comes to their family as well as the financial matters as well. As of now, they are restricted because most of the financial powers are being controlled by their husbands or the head of the family, which happens to be a man. If the money is provided by the state government, they would be in a much better position to make use of this money in a productive way for their families. But there is an alternative viewpoint to this particular analogy. We have one of the sociologists called as Anna Oakley. According to the sociologist Anna Oakley, she goes on to say that if money is provided to the women by the state or by the government, they would be completely subjugated and they would not have the freedom to venture what they want to in their real life scenario. So this will imprison women further within the household. Let's say for example, women would have great dreams, they would also have their own passions, they would also want to cultivate new habits and hobbies as well. They want to explore maximum opportunities as they come out of the household. If the state is providing such a money to them, this will obviously mean they will have to restrict themselves within their households, which means they would be imprisoned, says sociologist Anna Oakley. The same argument was also accepted by number of social women movements as well, where they accepted that women will have to be empowered, they have to be educated, they have to be empowered to take and make choices as per the will that they want to, rather than getting being paid so that they can conduct their daily house chores, says number of social movements as well. But there are other limitations and restrictions when it comes to this objective of wages for housework. What are these limitations? Let's say for example, the state, that is the government, decides that money has to be given. Whom will it give this particular money? First question, is it only for those who are working in the houses full time with no objective of going outside the house? This is one such person whom the state government can give. Or let's say there is a second condition where there is a woman who works at the house for about 8 hours, but she also works part time as well. So will the state provide money to this particular woman, is the second question. And the third question is about, let's say, a condition where there is a woman who is working at house, but because she also wants to earn, she engages herself in stitching of clothes as well, so that she gets ample amount of money. So in the particular scenario, if wages for housework is provided, will it be provided only to the first criteria woman, or to the second criteria woman, or to the third criteria woman? Such is an ambiguity state, says the author, in the present scenario. So instead of providing wages for the housework, the author in the present scenario says that universal basic income should be the norm. Identify which are the families, not only the women, but identify on a universal basis whether it is men or women. But if they are a family, universal basic income have to be provided to such a family. So if this particular money is given to a family, this money has to go to the account of the women. Instead of going for the men, it should go to the women, says the author. So what is the important articulation here? The wages for housework should not be implemented at the full level, but instead what we require is the universal basic income by identifying the women, and the money should be deposited to the women so that she can take care of the family, she can take care of the children, and also the entire family, is the first alternative strategy. The second alternative suggested by this article is coming up with a national legislation for domestic workers. Why is this legislation important? When you look into the number of domestic workers, that is women who go do the household work in some other houses, let's say for example cleaning, washing, or washing of the vessels, so on and so forth, these women do not have what is called as the security to their jobs. There are also scenarios where they are not paid periodically as well. So what this article suggests is coming up with the national legislation for the domestic workers, where majority of them are women. If we are able to come up with the law, safeguard their employment opportunities, and periodically provide bonuses to them, and we are providing them periodical interventions as well in the form of holidays with minimum wages guaranteed, conditions that are applied on an annual basis, bonus that is provided from the employer to the employee, that is the domestic worker, then what we are regulating is the women's work as well, says the author in the present scenario. So the two conditions instead of wages for the housework is, the author suggests, one is the universal basic income, the second a national legislation for the domestic workers, so that we can safeguard the rights of all the women who are working in some other houses. So the crux of this article is, a radical thought has been ignited in the political elections, but this has to be weighed properly and suitable steps will have to be taken, says the author in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says quality gigs a solution to urban employment. The article provides suggestions to reduce the unemployment crisis in the urban areas by using what is called as the gig platform, and asks the government to enter into viable partnership with the gig platform under some of the flagship programs of the government of India. When the COVID-19 hit the economy, many sectors were disturbed. One of the primary sectors is the construction sectors. Why is it one of the important sectors? That is because it provides jobs to thousands of people. As this sector's activity came to a standstill temporarily, people employed became unemployed. So is with other sectors as well. Let's say for example hospitality or tourism sector, so on and so forth. So as these people became unemployed, they had two options. One is go back to their villages, that is go back to the rural households, or continue to be present in the urban areas for a temporary period of time. Let's look at the first option. There were people who were unemployed because of the crisis in the construction sector, tourism sector, or the hospitality sector. So what do? They go back to the rural areas, that is they go back to the natives. The minute they went back to the native, what provided them the job is the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. For those who went back to their villages, jobs were provided under the NAREGA Act, where they were provided the livelihood security, they were provided employment as well. Many were accommodated during this particular process, and a few were not provided the jobs because of large number of people who went back to the villages. But as much as possible, they were accommodated under the NAREGA scheme, which was initiated by the central government. On the urban sector, we do not have a substitute similar to that of the National Rural Employment Guarantee. But the gig economy provided solace to all those urban unemployed youth during the COVID-19 crisis. Now the question is, what is this gig economy? Basically, these are the sectors which employ people on a temporary basis. It provides flexibility to the worker who is entering that particular domain, and companies tend to hire independent contractors as well. So what we have is permanent jobs being replaced by what is called as temporary jobs or flexible jobs. Now let's take some of the examples. If we are looking at examples with respect to gig economy, the person who delivers food to you and me by Swiggy or Zomato is a gig worker. Or let's say for example, the Ola and the Uber drivers that we all travel in is an example of the gig economy. Or let's say for example, if there are people who are delivering products on Flipkart as well as Amazon, they can also be one of the objectives of the gig economy as well. So what is the gig economy here? They are the flexible workers, they are the temporary workers, and not the permanent workers who are working for that particular company. Now the important question when it comes to the gig economy in the urban areas are twofold. One is in reference to the evaluation problem, the other is with respect to the regulation problem. What is it about the evaluation? Let's say for example, whenever we speak about gig economy, we do not know the number of workers who are working in this particular sector. We do not have an independent study which has deep rooted into that particular sector, understood what is the problem in that particular sector, has come up with suitable recommendations for the government. So the problem is also about studies being conducted with respect to the gig economy. And finally, we have the disclosures made by the companies which are not in stark reality of what is happening in the present scenario. So the evaluation of the gig economy is currently not present is one of the major criticisms under the present article. Then we also have something called as the regulation. What is the regulation? It is the government which lays out laws, but these are not being implemented when it comes to the regulation of the gig economy. Why? Because most of these sectors have two major problems. One, it has a one size fits approach for all. How? Let me give you an example. When people enter the gig economy, there are two types of people. One, who work for it on the primary level, the ones who enter on it on the secondary level. Who are the people who work at the primary level? Let's say for example, this is a person who is looking for a job on a full-fledged basis. He does not have any other job, but he relies only on this particular job to make his income, to make his livelihood during this particular process. Such a person is where he has the primary job. That is one part of this article. Then there is another picture of secondary working. What is the secondary working? Let's say for example, I am working in one of the companies. That's my major job. I get enough monthly salary as well, but that monthly salary given by one of the companies is not enough, or it is not able to meet up to whatever my expenses are. So what what do? I not only join one company, but I go to Swiggy or I go to Zomato. I work for Swiggy and Zomato as well, so that I get extra income in the present scenario. So what is happening here? On the primary level, you have a full-fledged job that a person is looking at. At the secondary level, the expenses are more for a particular person, so he is going and searching for a secondary opportunity so that he can fulfill all his expenses. So this is where the regulatory mechanism is not upkeeping it. Why? Because it is totally different, and the government will have to come up with new set of rules and cannot fit in one size fits approach, says the article. And at the same time, there are other platform workers as well. Let's say for example, there are freelancers. Who are these freelancers? They're not employed by a particular company as a full-time employee, but only when they need a particular employee, that is when they will hire that particular person. Of late, what you actually see in IT companies is, let's say for example, they are executing a particular project. If they have to hire what is called as the full-time employee, they have to provide the PF, they have to provide other important gratuity or so on and so forth. But if they are hiring, let's say a freelance worker, they need not have to provide all this. So what is happening here? There is firing that is taking place in the IT companies, and they are hiring only the freelance workers. So how is the government regulating such a sector? In such a scenario, you cannot have a one size fits approach. So the problem of one is with respect to the evaluation, the other problem is with respect to the regulation of the gig economy. So what we have is that the gig economy also has certain concerns when it comes to its operations. In order to overcome this issue, the article has come up with the third recommendation. What is this recommendation? The article currently goes on to say what we require is an integration of a government policy or a scheme with a private entrepreneur. Let's take the example of PM Street Vendors Atmanirbhar Nidhi. This is also called as PM Swanidhi as well. This was one of the schemes that was launched by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. It provides affordable working capital loan to the street vendors. Who are these street vendors? Let's say for example, there are two types of people. One who provides goods or sells goods to us. The other is a person who provides services to us. So who are these vendors? Let's say for example, they have these movable vehicles that they get, they sell us fruits, or let's say for example, they're providing us eggs, textiles, apparel, artisan, books, so on and so forth, or stationery. They bring all these goods to our houses and sell their products. That is what is called as the street vendor. They are selling the goods in the present scenario. Then we also have the service sector as well. Let's say for example, there is a barber or a cobbler or a pawn shop or a laundry service. They are providing services. These also fall under the street vendor. This is one of the program that was initiated by the government of India. So what does this program do? Basically, for all those people who were suffering because of the impact of the COVID-19, the government of India was supposed to provide some capital loan to the street vendors. This is what is the government initiative under the PM Swanidhi. Then we have a private entrepreneurship program as well. That is what is called as Swiggy's Street Food Vendors Program. What is this? Let's say for example, there are these street vendors, that is they have their vehicles, they also serve food as well. If you're able to pay them, they will also give you all the dishes that they are serving on the roads. So this is not a permanent hotel, but they are on the roads, they serve the food as well. In this particular scenario, what has Swiggy done? It has roped in all these food vendors who were working on the streets. So what has it done indirectly? This particular program of PM Swanidhi was supporting the street vendors. What has Swiggy done? It has roped in and it has said that if you are able to provide us quality and if you are able to register yourself with the Food Safety Standard Authority of India, and if it is meeting up the standards, these food vendors will be provided a platform and they would be able to deliver their food to the customers. So what is happening here? There is a government scheme which is for the street vendors. Then there is Swiggy, which happens to be a private company which is supporting what is called as the street vendors as well. So the article here is speaking about integrating the government scheme along with the private program. So one of the initiatives that could be done in the near future with respect to the gig economy is ask all these private companies to integrate their programs with the flagships programs of the government of India, says this article. The minute this will be done, it will be mutually beneficial both for the government as well as for the private players as well. How? Because the government need not have to invest more money and its fiscal health will not be disturbed, but its objective of empowering people, providing livelihood opportunities is being met as well. So what will happen? The fiscal health will not be disturbed and this will bring down the cost significantly for the government, and at the same time the livelihood opportunities for these people would be provided under a similar mechanism. So what we require is a more collaboration with the private sector, and apart from that the government will have to make sure that there is evaluation and regulation with respect to the gig economy. So going forward, it is not about the quantity of jobs that the government creates, but the quality of livelihood that it impacts, says this article, under the quality gigs, a solution to urban employment. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. This article says embracing energy efficiency. It speaks about the electricity rights of the consumer rules of 2020, where this article will be discussed in detail in our economy this week. Now let's look into some of the important preliminary facts. This article currently goes on to speak about what is called as the Pongdom Lake in Himachal Pradesh. This can be very important from your preliminary examination. So the Pongdom Lake is present in the state of Himachal Pradesh. We would not be discussing the practice questions. That is because we will have a separate video for the same when it comes to the MCQs. But as a fact of the matter, the Pongdom Lake is present in Himachal Pradesh, can be very important from the preliminary examination point of view. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about the prevention of sexual harassment at workplace. Kindly remember one of the landmark judgments of the Supreme Court which came up with what is called as the Vishaka guidelines. So we have one of the important Supreme Court cases called as the Vishaka versus the state of Rajasthan. So it was because of the Vishaka guidelines what we have is called as a legislation called as the prevention of sexual harassment at workplace. So kindly remember, it was only because the Supreme Court came up with Vishaka guidelines, that is why the legislature came up with a law called as the prevention of sexual harassment at workplace. This can also be important from your preliminary examination point of view. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. Governors should not exceed constitutional duties to serve as agents of the center but play an impartial role. Explain the statement with relevant examples. Gig economy can be beneficial in the urban areas if labor market is regulated and integrated with government policies. Substantiate. So please write all your answers on the comment section, peer review, and also come up with some constructive criticism. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.